Hello and welcome to Board. I'm Thurl, and today we will be reviewing Dead Cells. Now, if you are a regular viewer, you might know something is amiss because this isn't our usual style. But if this is maybe the first time you've seen us, just know that usually I have a co-host, Tally, but she is away on work. And then on top of that, our table where we would usually have the game set up and presented is actually, you could say, in maintenance, so I can't use it. And we just wanted to have a little stream of consciousness. Usually we are scripted and more edited, just because we've been enjoying Dead Cells the board game so much and we wanted to talk about it. But we also have a lot of review copies we've been sent that we owe reviews for, so we have to kind of, you could say, spend the time on those since they were kindly provided to us, whereas this we bought ourselves. So we're just throwing it out there, and I think in the future we'll return to it properly with more kind of usual review style, maybe when we've got a bit further in. Although we have actually spent a significant amount of time playing this, basically non-stop, definitely a solid 20 hours or more. And we think it's absolutely brilliant. So let's get into it. It's an adaptation of the video game. And interestingly for you, the viewer, I guess, I am a massive fan of Dead Cells. I've definitely put probably more than 100 hours into the video game, whereas Tally is complete novice in the world of Dead Cells. She'd never even heard of it before, and I don't even think she could tell you what a roguelite is. So this board game is based on the video game, and the video game is a roguelite game, which are essentially games where you could say, expected to die, but usually there's some sort of currency that carries between plays. So you can spend that on maybe better equipment, better starting setup, something better health, something like that. So every time you get a little bit better until you get to the end, potentially a final boss or something, which is the case with Dead Cells, a video game. So this board game is trying to recreate that of throwing yourself against the wall, dying, doing a little bit better each time, getting more equipment, more unlocks. So the way it sets out is you have kind of levels called biomes, and the general rhythm of the game is going to be you're going to play a biome, and then you'll have a little break where you can buy some equipment or heal, and then you're going to play a second biome, then another break, and then you're going to beat a boss or try to beat a boss, and then your run is over. If any one of you dies at any point in that run, your run is also over. So the way it works is that actually once you beat the boss after the first two biomes, then you kind of can start from a new biome. So it's not that there's only two in the game. There's a number, maybe 5 or 6 or 7, something like that. And so now you try to kind of start at the new biome, and then you go into another new second biome, and then you have a new boss that you haven't played, and so on and so on. So what you have is a map laid out full of semi-randomized tiles, and you can generally choose a path through this level, much like the video game. And you're turning over these tiles when you step in those spaces. Some are rewards, which you will deal with quite quickly, just get them and move on. And a lot of them are going to be combat. So they're going to spawn monsters. And this is the core gameplay of Dead Cells, the combat. So combat works in a round system where when you get a tile that tells you there's enemies, it will tell you how many to draw and from what monster decks, and they're kind of drawn randomly, although the decks are unique to each biome. And then you'll kind of arrange them from left to right on this combat board. And there are a number of spaces on this board from left to right, and you'll take actions from left to right. So there's 4 spaces for monsters, 1, and then there's a space for the players, and then the other 3 spaces for monsters. And you go from left to right. But if there's a monster to the left of you or not, it kind of depends on that monster and their actions. Usually they'll be to the right, so you'll get to go first. Each player will play a combat card. And this is maybe a bit, say, where the player count's a bit weird in Dead Cells, because the ideal player count appears to be 3 players, because you'll always play 3 combat cards in combat, no matter how many players there are. So if you're playing at 2 players, the first player will play 2, and the second player 1 card. If you're playing at 3, every player plays a single card. If you're playing at 4, one player will not do anything in that combat and instead get an upgrade to their player board. So someone's always sitting out whenever you have a combat in 4 players. So you all play your combat cards, and essentially the combat is working in rounds. So technically there's 5 rounds, but usually you only deal with 3. So round 0 is kind of things before the combat, where sometimes effects will trigger or special actions you have will, like getting a shield or putting damage on a monster early, will trigger. Then you'll have round 1, which is the first round of the proper combat, and you'll go from left to right, and anyone who has actions in round 1 on their card will then do that action. Same for round 2, same for round 3, and then there's a round 4, where generally only monsters will activate, and that's if you leave them alive. So the combat will always end, except for bosses, after round 3. And whether you have killed them or not, they just go away, essentially. But some might give you a final hit on the way out in this round 4. Usually, though, you want to try and kill them because they give rewards when they die. So a lot of this gameplay is about the communication between players of what to do when. The monsters will activate at different times, and each monster will have different abilities. So it's about using your cards and this kind of when you act or can act based on the cards, because usually you'll only be able to act in 1 or 2 or 3 rounds with each card. So it's about trying to get the rhythm of kind of attack and defense. Which monster do you focus on? Can we take this out before this happens? And it's a really nice system because it's very simple, but with the addition of status effects and shields and things like that, it really broadens it to make it quite an interesting level of combat where there's a lot to consider. And also the fact that the monsters are randomized, which means that the way they combine together is usually somewhat novel, and that gives you a lot of different considerations compared to, say, the last round of combat you had, or the last combat you had with monsters. On top of that, players, each player will have a unique beheaded board. The player character is called beheaded. There's 4 of them, and they all have their own unique tracks, which you get upgrades for and unlock special powers and get more powerful. And because they're unique, they each play in different ways. They have a semi-unique combat deck of cards. And so there's a lot of fun in trying out because it's very adaptable. You can just, in between runs, swap to another character and just continue your new run with that. So that is, you could say, the core of Dead Cells. And a big part of it beyond that is the fact that you get these upgrades. So you're going to collect cells, and then when you die or beat a boss, you're going to be spending them to get cards from a number of decks. There are 4 decks: the Abandoned Well, which is kind of a random deck. It's a bit humorous, a bit silly, and you never know what you're going to get from it. And then there's Brutality, Tactics, and Survival, which if you've played the video game, you'll know correspond to kind of the different attributes of weapons and items. So you'll put your cells into this and you'll get all kinds of goodies and sometimes bad things as well, not to spoil anything. But just some basic stuff. You might start with a potion or start with some money or be able to start with equipment cards. So the main thing I'd want to say is that this game impeccably replicates the feeling of Dead Cells and roguelites in general with the way you unlock things, because you start, and it was quite funny because Tally was really frustrated at, like, is this it? Like, we're dying 3 monsters in, like, and she really didn't know what to expect. And I could see there was a bit of frustration. And then you unlock stuff and you're like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, now we have new combat cards. Oh, now we start with this. And then you begin to get further and you get further and you have new experiences. And then you get to the boss and then you die at the boss. And then, you eventually beat it. And there's just a lot of excitement and fun of just playing, even when you know you're going to die, but just to get those dead cells to then spend them. And they make that almost the highlight of the game, that what are you going to get next? How are we going to be able to use that on our next run? And this feeds into this addictive loop of Dead Cells, the board game, of you always want to do another run. You want to use your new equipment or hope to see it. You want to use the new skill card you get. You want to do the objective you just got given. And the decks are quite big, so there's quite a wealth. I think we've had about 15 runs at this point, and there's definitely a lot of cards left, and also they get more expensive to balance out. So it's just a really enjoyable experience because the combat is interesting, and I think a good benefit is there's no quarterbacking because you have your own deck. They're semi-unique, even though the actions might be similar, but you can't just show the cards to the other players. So there's a lot of that table talk. And this is maybe a criticism as well. The rulebook's not the best, and they're a bit loose on what you can and can't communicate. They very much don't show the cards to other players, just talk briefly about what you might want to do, and then just start playing the cards. And then when you play a card, you actually do say, I'm going to attack in round 2. You get to say one thing that you're doing. But it's all a bit loose. It's not really clear what you can and can't say when you're in that discussion phase, which can make things a bit difficult because obviously you're not supposed to say, I can do this, this, and this. But it's a bit weird, and it would be nice if that was clearer. But the puzzle is still quite great. And I think one thing they do exceptionally well is I think we all know that in games where enemies have to get tougher because you get stronger, it's the worst way to do it if they just get more health or they just deal more damage. And what they do here actually is kind of from the start, to some extent, you can play around with a lot of the status effects, freeze, fire, bleeding, poison, whereas the monsters don't really do that. They just kind of shield or attack. And then as you get to the harder biomes, they begin to bring in these elements. So it's not just that now the monster has double the health, it's actually that they act in different unique ways compared to previous monsters, and it's a new puzzle for you. It's something new for you to think about and counteract. And I really enjoy that as well. So I think just to have a bit of a wrap up, this is potentially both of our favorite cooperative game. Both Tally has said that, and I myself also think it's probably going to end up being my favorite cooperative game. I think it perfectly implements the video game, although obviously the combat in the video game is fast-paced and frantic, and this is a bit more methodical and picking your way through the puzzle, so to speak. But every other element of incorporating that video game into this board game is really on point. As a fan, I really love it, but Tally has also really loved the way that the game runs and unlocking new things and new abilities and new paths and new biomes. And it's been a huge hit with both of us. So it's something I completely recommend if you're interested in getting it. I have no doubt this is going to end up on our top 10 game of the year list. And I look forward to playing more and kind of getting to the end and seeing what's there, and then doing a more formal review, you could say. I ended up having to insert this bit because I realized when I thought about what I'd been saying, I'd been so excited by how much I enjoyed the gameplay of Dead Cells that I didn't mention some of the potential negatives I would like to address. I already spoke about the player count and how, at 4 players, it's probably not something you want to play. And then I think one of the biggest issues we found, which is kind of hard to measure because you're obviously supposed to progress and get stronger in this game, and you also get new combat cards to fill out your deck. But what we found is, so I touched upon the randomness of the monsters coming out and how that can make for interesting puzzles in combat because, depending how they mix together, you have different considerations. So that is a big positive of this game, but also is a negative of this game because occasionally, or let's just say it's on a spectrum where the monsters can come out and they can be completely disjointed and ineffective, that you wipe them out easily, or they can come out with the perfect combination that makes them like a crack SAS team and they just obliterate you. And while that's fine in and of itself, sometimes it can be really harsh in the way they come out, such as having multiple shield bearers and then enemies which also add shields. And shield bearers add shields, and although not quite so simple, shields can be seen as more health basically because they block damage. So if you're adding shields, then it's going to take more damage to kill them. So you can have it where you'll get 3 shields put on the enemies in the first round, and then some more shields in the second round. And obviously this is upping the difficulty of defeating them in terms of how much damage you have to do. So they can come out and they can be very tough if you get multiple. But where it really combines is with the randomness of the cards, because you only have a 3-card hand, and you're probably going to only be playing one of those unless you're playing 2-player, and then somebody might play 2. Now, this combines because in the example I just gave, you want to act early. You want to take out at least one of them in the first round to prevent, shield spawning, basically. But if none of you have any cards that will let you act in the first round, then that combat is already lost because you just can't really affect it before it's too late. Now, there might be some other ways. I'm kind of not considering all the angles here, but just to illustrate that sometimes you do get a hand of cards and you have enemies and you look at them and you just go, this is utterly useless. I just can't do anything with this. And it's when these two things combine together and you just kind of get like completely knocked out without really being able to be effective, that it can feel a bit frustrating. And this is of course lessened because you're supposed to die, but it feels worse than when you just get overpowered by the enemies, or you progressively lose more and more health across a biome and then you end up dying. So that's something that it happens enough that it's worth addressing, but it's also not incredibly common. But it was a point of frustration. And then something following on from when you die is that each biome is relatively easy to set up because you just semi-randomize some tiles and it's a kind of shape matching puzzle, if you will. And then you just shuffle a monster deck and you're kind of ready to go. But it can be a bit frustrating if you set up a biome and then you die 1 or 2 kind of tiles into that biome, and then you have to pack everything away again and like get out the other biome. And it means that it has quite a big table presence because you generally are probably not going to pack away, because you're doing these runs and you're dying and you're resetting. You're probably not going to pack everything away in the biome boxes every single time you enter or leave a biome, right? So just something else to consider. But I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about the game, please just ask. I really appreciate it. If this was helpful, then consider subscribing. And I really appreciate you watching. And sorry about the format this time. It will be back to our usual format in the next video. See you next time. Goodbye.